So it's such a good question because a number of people have said to me, why would you suggest using timber? Don't we need to protect our forests? And again, it's a sort of zero-sum logic, which really isn't helpful in terms of understanding the problem. And I'll explain to you why. One is we absolutely have to protect our current forests, particularly the ones which have high degrees of biodiversity, particularly the ones which are vital to the hydrological cycle of the planet. I think of the Congo Basin and the ecosystem services that that particular mosaic of of, uh, of of tropical forest provides to the world, actually sequestering more carbon than the Amazon, and it's actually the world's primary lung at the moment. And I say a couple of things to these actors who believe that the way to protect forests is to not touch them. One, forests have high value. In fact, we don't value our forests as much as they should be. If we begin to take into account the ecosystem services, if we begin to take into account the value that's provided by biodiversity, if we begin to take into account their impact on the planet, their value should be far much, much higher. And because of the low value of forests at the moment, it means that it's fairly innocuous for a person to decide to illegally log and sell that piece of timber at a very, very low price because the forest has a low value. What we found is that by the industrialization of specific parts of the forest, the value of the forest increases. And there's a point at which the value becomes so high that it's much more attractive for a forest community person to say, I'm going to keep this tree because the returns that I get from harvesting this tree down the line, or even through a forest concessionaire partnership, is actually higher than me chopping it down now for wood or for firewood, or to sell it very quickly to an unscrupulous actor at the local port. So in many ways, it's the industrialization and the elevation of the value of forests that will allow us to protect them. In Gabon, we have found that there's been a substantial increase in the amount of elephants that have actually um, gravitated and live more in forest concession plantation areas than natural forest landscapes. And they do this because in those forest plantations, they're better policed. So the elephants are aware that their death rates are lower in plantations than they are in natural forests. So isn't it fascinating that through the economic imperative, if you will, of plantations and planting trees and actually supporting biodiversity, that nature is now finding a foothold where it wouldn't find in other sorts of places. Absolutely mind-boggling. And we're seeing this with gorillas, we're seeing this with various other species. So the overall lesson I think that needs to be conveyed is that 100% we do not want to industrialize all of our forest resources. We're not saying that. We definitely have to keep large proportions, if not more. I mean, the current narrative is around 30%. I think it should be 50% of these forests should actually be devoid of human activity, period. But I do think we need to increase our forest cover substantially. Evidence has shown that since the 1830s, arguably, the world has lost about 30% of its forest cover. 30%. Which means that in order for us to get back to pre-industrial levels of forest coverage, we actually need to increase our forest coverage by 30%. And if we increase our forest coverage by 30%, I don't think it's implausible that 50% of that increase should be dedicated towards productive, biodiverse plantation landscapes. The remaining portion could be very well the creation of new, intact, rewilding notions of how do we create natural environments. And I think the trajectory is to say, in order to reach that increased target, of which 30%, by the way, is very much beyond current human patterns of behavior at the moment, we'll be lucky if we get even to 10% increased cover, let alone arresting current deforestation. But if you imagine with me, if you will, a world in which we say we need to plant 30% more trees globally, different countries will have a different ratio of what needs to contribute to that increased 30%. Through the creation of that new abundance, if you will, that we can possibly increase biodiversity. We can definitely create the stocks that we will need for the creation of future cities, and the necessity for fibers to create the various products that I've described that are possible from wood. And that, in fact, is almost the beauty of creating a renewable resource, is that unlike oil, which is finite, if we plant forests, we're actually growing our own resources for the future. And that's an incredible asset to have. So I would encourage a young person to think of really trees in a number of ways. One is that trees are better for our cities. They bring local temperature down. They give us shade. As human beings, we have a natural relationship to nature. So it's good for our well-being. The second part that I would say is that from a neighborhood level, leafier, green environments are always, compared to areas which do not have trees, valued higher. The parks, the streets which have the trees are always seen as more attractive. So your real estate actually increases by planting trees, a real estate value, if you will. And then there's the third part that we've been discussing right now, which are the broader systemic implications of having a more green environment and the job creation that comes out of that. Not all areas are suitable for trees because human beings do live in places which are very difficult for trees to grow. We can think of the northern part of the continent and certainly large parts of southern Africa, savanna landscape, where trees would not normally have been there. My answer to that is, one is that we need to think about appropriate afforestation. Planting the right tree in the right place is, I think, a very important part of the discourse, but also to remember that human agency has the ability to transform environments. Johannesburg, by all accounts, is seen as the world's largest unnatural forest because it was actually a savanna landscape prior to about 1860. But now it is a very green city in many respects. So environments can be transformed for the better. Obviously, we must work with our environmental colleagues to ensure that we're not destroying ecosystems and replacing them with alien ones, which we do not have a full sense of their impact on ourselves or on the environment. But I think we should seize our ingenuity as a species to answer those questions rigorously, to plant new trees for a future generation, to make better environments where we live, work, and play, but to also create a resource against which our children and grandchildren will be able to create jobs using the natural resources that are near to them. And in many respects, in closing, this is how it has been for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. The current concrete jungles that we associate urbanization with largely are a product of a boom of construction that started in the 1920s, 1930s, up until today. So this is a very small portion of our history on the planet. In fact, 99.99% of our history has been building with nature-based materials. It's only this recent period where we have overextended ourselves by not using nature-based solutions. So we can tell that young person in Africa that we are actually returning to our climate-smart roots by using nature as an ally in the making of better livelihoods.